Hello, good evening. Here's how it goes. Laurie will read from her latest book, Unspeakable Things. And after that, we will have an onstage discussion, a short one, or not.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you all can ask questions, and please do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking of questions, because, it's no need to be polite. Well, I mean, a bit polite would be good. I feel like I have, given the current political climate, that the definition of polite has changed. So please be slightly polite. But it's also it's really, really great to be here, and thank you all for having me, and also thank you for listening to me talk in English, because I know it's a great privilege to be able to come to a different country and just assume that people will speak your language. So I don't take that for granted, and thank you very much for listening to me. If there's anyone who, I don't know if you'd be up for this, but if there's anybody who wants to ask a question in German, or if that's more comfortable for people, would you be okay to translate?
Of course.
Okay, great, thanks. So given what's gone on in the past couple of weeks, and what's going on in Europe and has been going on for the last few years, I thought I'd read a bit from my chapter on men and masculinity, and then we'll see how that goes with discussion and questions. And it's the second chapter of the book, and it's called Lost Boys. So I'm going to take off my glasses. Oh no, it's fine. It's probably Oh, hi, hey guys. Right. Where is the power that today's young men were promised? Over 5 years of financial catastrophe and youth unemployment, I have watched countless young men, some of them very close to me, quietly drowning. The recession wasn't Disneyland for young women either, but we proved in some ways more emotionally robust. Fewer of us were raised to expect dignified work or financial security as an identity-forming part of our futures, and most of us were trained to accommodate exploitation on and off the job, which is exactly what today's employers are looking for. Feminism has never been just about liberating women from men, but about freeing every human being from the straitjacket of gender oppression. It's also International Men's Day today, so hooray, you guys, you get a day. Also, the other 365 days of the year. Hooray for you guys. For the first time, men and boys as a whole are starting to realize how profoundly messed up masculinity is, and to ask how they might make it different. Masculinity matters to politics, and men matter to feminism. Their violence matters, and so does their fear. Collective, articulated terror, as society seems increasingly stacked against individual men, terror that they might lose even the scraps of privilege propping up their collapsing self-worth. How should men and boys behave when male privilege doesn't necessarily mean power? Watching these young men grow up into a very different world from the one they were promised, my first reaction has always been sympathy. This isn't necessarily true anymore. I was young and nicer when I wrote this. It's surprisingly easy to sympathize, says 26-year-old Laurie. Ha, 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 how little you knew. For two reasons. Firstly, because so much of our culture is set up to make it easy to sympathize with white, middle-class, cisgender men who get to be the heroes of almost every story. We are not encouraged to understand the suffering of women or the very poor in quite the same way. They are unlike us, even when they are us, these people shut out by prejudice and austerity, fighting for a voice at the edge of what is considered relevant discourse. And secondly, because the disappointment of young white guys is so very raw. They grew up expecting the whole world in a lunchbox, and now, too often for comfort, they can't even make themselves a sandwich. At least that's what I pick up from the number of anonymous men on the internet who seem so desperate for me to make them one. I do. When you are anticipating power and ease, not getting it stings like a slap. It is men's lost dashed dreams that seem to matter most, and it is men's resentful rage that makes their frustration fearful. For people who have grown up relying on privilege without even having to think about it, the sudden loss of that privilege hits you like a fist to the stomach on a sunny day. It's the punch you weren't expecting. Suddenly, all the things you thought were just going to happen to you when you reached a certain age, along with pubic hair and tax returns, don't. It turns out that being part of the dominant half of the human race, being sexually and socially superior to women, being first in line for jobs and promotion, being taken seriously at work and at home, having your ideas listened to on their own merit precisely because you're a man, none of that is encoded. It is not your genetic inheritance, and it can be taken away. How are men supposed to cope with this loss of power in a society that still insists that the only way to be a man is to grab as much power as possible, to be rich, to be capable of extreme violence, to dominate other men physically, and to dominate women sexually and emotionally? The received wisdom is that they're not supposed to cope. Without power over others, particularly over women, men are supposed to crumble, to lash out, to collapse in an extravagant welter of identity implosion that leaves a suspicious mess on the carpet. If this is really the case, then men must be fragile creatures indeed. The great obstacle to women's progress is not men's hate, but their fear. The men's rights activists who organize to drown out and silence women on the internet and who have now taken power in the United States are usually fearful, lonely creatures who are desperate to speak out about gender, but only able to do so as a way of shutting women down. That expression of fear comes from a profoundly childish place, a posture which is as fascistic in its policing of gender roles as a playground bully, and which uses words like feminazi with apparent seriousness. It is as if by talking about the hurt women experience, often because we are women, we are somehow preventing men from speaking about the painful pressures of masculinity. Interestingly, for many men, the only time they do feel able to talk about their own suffering is when they are trying to stop women talking about theirs. In every other context, men and boys are discouraged from talking about their pain. Thinking in a new way about sex, gender, and power can help men to process that pain, but it is far easier just to blame women. Increasingly, before we talk about misogyny, women are asked to modify our language so that we don't hurt men's feelings. You can't say men oppress women, and that's sexism. It's just as bad as any sexism women ever have to handle, and possibly worse. Instead, say some men oppress women. Whatever you do, don't generalize. That's something men do. Not all men, of course, just some men. This type of semantic squabbling is a very effective way of getting women to shut up. After all, most of us grew up learning that being a good girl was all about putting other people's feelings ahead of our own. We aren't supposed to say what we think if there's a chance it might upset somebody else or worse, make them angry. I see this used as a silencing technique across the social justice movements with which I am associated. Black people are asked to consider the feelings of white people before they speak about their own experience. Gay and transsexual people are asked not to be too angry because it makes straight people feel uncomfortable. And so we stifle our speech with apologies, caveats, and soothing sounds. We reassure our friends and loved ones that, of course, you're not one of those men. You're not one of those racists or those homophobes or those men who hate women. What we don't say is, of course, not all men hate women, but culture hates women. And men who grow up in a sexist culture have a tendency to do and say sexist things, often without meaning to. We aren't judging you for who you are, but that doesn't mean we're not asking you to change your behavior. What you feel about women in your heart is of less importance than how you treat them on the daily basis. You can be the gentlest, sweetest man in the world and still benefit from sexism, still hesitate to speak up when you see women hurt and discriminated against. That's how oppression works. Thousands of otherwise decent people are persuaded to go along with an unfair system because changing it seems like too much bother. The appropriate response when somebody demands a change in that unfair system is to listen rather than turn away or yell as a child might that it's not your fault. Of course it isn't your fault, I'm sure you're lovely. That doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to do something about it. I'll stop there. That's it. I've stopped. So we can... Thank you.
All right, I did prepare some questions about unspeakable things, and one of the questions is about this chapter. And
We can start there.
I will start there. So, the argument that all genders, but especially men, also benefit from feminism is widely used to justify it or to make it, more harmless and more nice.
Yeah.
So, how can we include men in feminism without centering our feminism around men?
Yeah, this is always a hard one, isn't it? Because, because sometimes, and again, it's not people's fault, but it's very hard to get across to a certain kind of man, and in other spaces to a certain kind of white person within spaces for people of color, that being included in a space doesn't mean getting to control that space and being the most important person in that space. And saying that feminism has to include men it's still a movement for and led by women and queer people and people of different genders. It's not about men first and foremost. It can't be. It's and I don't believe that saying that is threatening to guys. I mean, they get to have everything else, after all. I mean, you don't get to be, just because you don't get to be in charge of something doesn't mean it isn't for you, and that's what women have kind of had to deal with, learning about every other aspect of thought and identity and culture for our whole lives. So, I mean, guys should really just suck it up. But can I say something about this? And again, in the days since the US election, my stammer has kind of come back a little bit, so I apologize. It happens when I'm stressed. But I want to say something about the last few days and the US elections. And when I wrote this, I was concerned, and with the men's rights movement and the backlash against feminism that I was already seeing when I wrote this in 2013 and early 2014. And in the 2.5 years since I finished the book, there has been a huge change, and this has escalated so much. And I think it's really important to make space to talk, particularly on International Men's Day, about how toxic masculinity and how men's resentment, and particular white men's resentment, white, straight, cisgender men's resentment, has come to form the kind of politics we're seeing in Europe and America right now. And obviously the politics we're seeing are about race as well. In America, a huge proportion of white women also voted for Donald Trump, but Trump's misogyny can't be separated from his policies, his persona, and all of the far-right movements in Europe and, I guess I ought to say in Europe and the UK now. Fuck's sake. I'm really sorry about that. We did try. But all of these far-right movements who have not yet taken power but seek to take power, they're incredibly misogynistic as well as racist and homophobic and xenophobic. You look at the AfD in Germany, and their policies on the family, their policies on abortion rights. Misogyny is a deep and brutal current running through society right now, and the backlash against the gains that women have made and that feminism has made can't be discounted from this conversation. And I know this isn't an answer to the question you asked, but I feel like...
But it's relevant.
Yeah, it deserves an update, because back then these guys were confined to fringe sites, and they were doing their harassment in bits and pieces on the internet. Not that it wasn't really bad for those of us in harm's way. And I've been talking in the past week and a half with a lot of people I know within the online feminist community, the online social justice community. And one thing that everybody's been saying to each other is, look, we were talking about these guys years ago. These guys have been around doing their thing for years. And when we said, these guys are stalking us, harassing us, threatening our families, there's real world violence happening, we were told, it's nothing, just shut down your computer, just stay off the internet. You probably deserved it. You were probably being a bit loud, and people are very upset, and they're just little boys, and, cool that, chill out. Those people are now taking power in the most in the highest levels of government and seeking to do so across the world. Trump has appointed Steve Bannon as part of his strategy team, his transition team. Steve Bannon is like one of the gurus for these red pill guys online. He invented the word libtard, among other things. They really like these weird colloquialisms like feminazi. They think it's clever. I don't know. But it's not funny. I don't find it funny. So it's kind of, if I'm smiling about this, that means I'm really, really worried. But yeah, we've been saying all of this stuff for ages, and it doesn't. This is not an I told you so moment. Like, it gives us, nobody I know is pleased at all to be proved right, but it's really, really important to pay attention to the mentality here. And again, I don't think speaking about this is appropriate without the update. So I don't know where we go from there. I know you've got lots of questions prepared, but it's a very specific time in world history right now. So
yeah, there's privilege at stake, obviously, and you write that there's a need for mutiny.
Yeah,
Meuterei. I had to look it up. So how are we gonna, mobilize those privileged people to join for equality, for feminism?
Oh, well, again, I was a lot more hopeful about this 2.5 years ago, and I think, as ever, mobilizing privileged people is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. I mean, at the end of the day, people who aren't privileged can make social change happen by themselves. It's a lot harder. But I think things are going to change so much in the next year, in the next 6 months. We're already seeing it happen. But I think, if you'd asked me this a few months ago, my answer would have been different. But I think it now comes down to making it clear to people in positions of privilege, not necessarily economic privilege, that their interests are not aligned with the neo-fascist and rampantly misogynist elements within society. And that may even be easier in the United States, where, this billionaire tycoon has just taken power, saying that he's the man of the people. And, pretty soon it's going to be clear that he's not going to betray his class. These people are not going to betray their class. They never do. But when that happens, that's when people like us, presumably, I hope, are gonna have to really make our cases clear, because that's the point. People hate to be proved wrong. People hate when America doesn't suddenly become great again. That's not, the people who voted for Trump aren't necessarily going to all turn around and say, "Oh, sorry, we were wrong." That's when people get even angrier and start looking for scapegoats, and that's the really dangerous moment. And that's the moment when mobilization is going to be even more important. And that's the moment when building bridges will be more important, in appealing to people across, on the basis of class, on the basis of universal ideals of justice and decency and fairness and believing in a future, is going to really, really matter. Yeah, I'm on a real anti-fascist kick right now, but I think that's kind of appropriate, so I'm not sorry, but I hope that's okay.
It is.
Yay.
I think. Okay. I'll just, I'll switch through the chapters. I will start with neoliberalism. So, how do we resist the promises, the emptiness of it all?
Of neoliberalism? Well, again, this is a really interesting question right now, because one thing that both the New Left and the New Right movements have in common, there was a fantastic article by Cornel West in The Guardian recently laying this out, and I think it was yesterday that it came out. One thing these movements have in common is opposition to the current economic order of neoliberalism, the idea that the market controls everything, the privileging of debt within the economy, the idea that anti-welfarism, anti-social democracy, and the New Right has risen up in instinctive response to that. And so have elements of the New Left, although they've not done as well. Now, traditionally, and up until very recently, democratic centralism and liberal centralism has continued to align itself with neoliberal interests, not socially. It's been continued to be socially liberal to some extent, but there has been no movement on economic policy. There's been very little attempt to mitigate people's basic living situations, and that will have to change now if there's any lesson from the Clinton campaign. I mean, they ran the best campaign that they possibly could with the candidate that they have, whose only redeeming feature in many ways was her gender. I mean, and that's glib. I didn't really mean that. She had some good policies, but to a lot of people, Hillary Clinton looked like the status quo, and exactly like the status quo that everybody was so angry with. She represented that king-making sense of stability and liberal centrist stability, and that's the same model vision of stability which has really not worked for a great many people over the past 10 years, in particular since 2008. And really right now is when even the moderate democratic left really needs to take a look at itself and decide what it's for. And my great hope is that America and Europe learns the lesson of what happened in Britain after the Brexit referendum, which is that the Labour Party decided that was the moment when it was going to start eating itself. That was Britain in its greatest constitutional and democratic crisis for generations. Right then was when they had to have a leadership contest and spend months fighting over which guy they wanted and I mean, it was just, I don't know if anybody was following it. I mean, some people were. I'm really sorry. It was really embarrassing. It was like watching your parents fight. Really, I mean, if anybody's ever watched their parents fight, great love for my parents, but like, it's that same feeling of, oh my God, I can see arguments on both sides here, but really the important thing is that there's a bigger picture, and the important thing is that you stop fighting right now, maybe, and work out how we're going to steer this ship forward. It's fortunately, the American left seems not to be doing that, which is really, really good. The lesson not to take from that, which some parts of the American left are doing, and I'm seeing this argument in parts of Europe as well, is to say, oh, well, this new right really, I mean, they seem to really have a point about women, and about minorities and about immigrants. Maybe we should listen. I mean, honestly, people only ever seem to want to listen to the voice of the people when the people are being fucking racist and xenophobic. They never, there's never been anxiety to listen to the voice of the people when we were asking for economic change, massive change in the welfare system, and saying, hey, we're not being paid enough and the housing stock is shitty, and please change this. The lesson to take from it is not that identity politics are wrong. That's the wrong thing to change here. I think this is a time where we kind of need to double down on what other people call identity politics and instead change our economic... I mean, you look at how popular Bernie Sanders was. Imagine a candidate who was able to inspire that kind of enthusiasm and passion on the left, who was also supported by the mainstream. I mean, not that everything is about elections, but that's the kind of thing that we need more of. I've seen so many pieces out in the last couple of weeks in particular, but also after Brexit, saying, well, we were a bit liberal, we were a bit social justicey, and we did say a lot of things about feminism, and maybe these students should have just shut up, and it was all their fault. Really, fascism is not caused by student feminists. Like, I cannot make that clear enough. And and if there are any student feminists here, it's really not your fault, and you can keep doing what you're doing. That's fine. I hope you do. That's it.
So, yeah, we see that the political right has a lot of attention from the media all the time, and the left doesn't manage it. Like, they can't keep their level of voice up with the political right. What is the media supposed to do? You're a journalist, so how do you deal with Trump without making it a Trump show, for example, or any other politician?
Yeah. Well, look, Donald Trump is very, very clever in this respect. I'm on the team that thinks Donald Trump is much, or at least the people behind him are much cleverer than they appear to be, much like many politicians of that ilk have been down the years. Donald Trump is a reality TV star and an entertainer first and foremost, and understands that what people want to see. A friend said this to me on the other day, that Hillary Clinton was trying to run on a campaign of being Abraham Lincoln, and Donald Trump kind of understood that what people want right now is not Abraham Lincoln, it's Kim Kardashian. Although Kim Kardashian came out against Trump, even though Kanye has now come out for Trump, thinking about it, which must make for some interesting conversations in that house. But, that will be interesting. I worry about that kid. But I'm sure the kid's fine. But there is a new kind of culture of entertainment and grabbing the spotlight. The media, I don't think the media is to blame in creating this culture, but the attention economy and a media and a news media which is so hungry for exciting or outrageous stories, part of that is non-optional right now because of the way we fund media. I mean, as a journalist, this is kind of dorky, but you can understand a lot of the coverage that we've seen over the past few years because of the fact that journalism is an industry in crisis. Journalism is an industry which is seeing its bottom line completely disappear, and people are worried about their jobs, and people, you can criticize clickbait, yes, but people need those clicks, otherwise they have to fire their workers. And when you're in that situation, it stops you thinking about the long term in that way. The other thing is that Hillary Clinton, for example, and the Remain campaign in the UK made arguments based on long, long lists of facts without paying attention to people's feelings. Donald Trump and the Leavers made arguments based on flagrant lies, absolute lies, utter bullshit, which took days to be discredited at most. And even they came out and said, we didn't mean any of that. We didn't mean that 350 million. Actually, the economy's tanked now. We didn't mention that, but yeah, they were right, I guess. But, lies, but really appealing to people's feelings. And as a journalist, and I'm not a policy campaign director, but as somebody who writes in public, you can't just give people a list of facts and then shout at them for not making the right conclusions. This is why great respect for what academics do. This is why I'm not an academic, because it's like expecting people to form a movement based on an academic paper. It doesn't work, and people just get angry. People get angry when they're presented with something that they find difficult to understand. Because, look, everybody finds academic papers difficult to understand. I find academic papers difficult to understand. And this is in Western Europe, where education is pretty good. In the United States, look, we're all talking about Facebook right now, and, Facebook's, media policies and the filter bubble and how that affected voting patterns. I think not enough attention has been paid to the fact that the latest statistic I read is that somewhere around 14% of Americans can't read. It's huge and it's shocking. There are a lot of countries in the global south and developing countries who have much higher literacy rates than the United States. And a lot of voters, when they were, asked what you think about Hillary Clinton, they're like, I can't understand what she's saying. She might have good policies, I don't know. Hillary Clinton is a nerd. We need more nerds in government. It would help if they weren't also, really obsessed with war. But, but nerds are great. War nerds, not so much. But, that kind of, as a nerd, I understand the importance of translating. it's and I don't think that's patronizing to say. Like, I put a lot of work and effort myself, and I put a lot of intellectual work into making and I know this is one of your questions as well.
It was one of my questions.
Yeah. It's like, how do you write in an accessible way? Like, I read her questions beforehand. She let me. It wasn't like, well, she was in the loo or anything. Yeah, it's writing in an accessible way to me is really, really important because, like, again, look, with this, the difference between academia and journalism in terms of writing is that with academia, and this is fine, you need people to do this stuff, like, you want to write in a way that makes the writer seem very clever and makes the subject being discussed, that almost makes more complex, the subject being discussed. But as a journalist, if somebody doesn't understand what I've written, I consider that my failure, not theirs. Unless they've willfully misunderstood, which happens a lot. But if somebody reads an article of mine in good faith and misses the point, or misses what I was trying to say, or doesn't come away with at least some kind of insight, I feel that's my failure. And I don't think it's patronizing to people to expect. I don't think people are tired. People have 9-to-5 jobs. You can't expect them at the end of that to sit down and spend a long, long time piecing out a really boring article you've just written. I think that's unfair. So I try to be as entertaining as possible and as easy to read as possible, and not use too many lefty, jargony words. And I have friends on the left and, theory people I know who take the piss out of me for that, and who are like, you don't talk about hegemony, you don't talk about oligarchy. And I was like, I do. I just don't use those words all the time because, I'm not trying to impress you. I'm not trying to impress the people who have read Hegel and have read Marx. They're often insufferable. But no, I don't mean that. Not all of them. Hashtag not all Leninists. Not all university critical theory students. Bless them. But, it's not those people I'm not interested in trying to impress. I'm not even interested in trying to convert. I'm interested in trying to make ideas as accessible as possible, and that's the work. I mean, there are people who wouldn't really consider me a journalist because I have my agenda quite clearly on the table, although I think that just makes me honest. But, it's the work of, if you write about politics, I think that's part of the job. I always have. And I think that's also part of the job of news media, of all kinds of media, and of politics as well, is to make ideas accessible and powerful and to speak to emotion and fact at the same time. I mean, it shouldn't be this hard to make the truth sexy. But truth by itself often doesn't do the job. I also come from like a theatre background, like a musical theatre background, and I get really upset when people take issue with the idea that maybe the left should try and be more entertaining at some point. I know it's like, you guys have come here in good faith, but I'm trying to engage with you. I'm not just kind of sitting here in a microphone reading from my book and then just going silent and waiting for you to come back to me. Like, I would consider that rude, and I consider it rude as an attitude taken by any news outlet, any writer. I think it's rude and unfair. Anyway, sorry, I seem to be ranting a lot today.
That's good. Okay, so talking about your job, and you told me you are a workaholic.
Yep.
So how do you manage your time and resources? Like, especially in times like these when people want to engage in discussions, in pointless discussions, like on Twitter. Like,
yeah, well...
How do you handle that one?
Well, I've got much better at the Twitter thing. I now really don't have a lot of time for discussions on Twitter that don't interest me. Sometimes I'll get, like today I got involved in a big discussion about whether it was all right to be quoting Harry Potter in times of crisis, and I think it is. There's this strain on the left where people have decided that the real problem is people quoting Harry Potter and Hamilton. It's just like, there are people in every political movement who weren't bullied at school like the rest of us and just want to go around and slam some heads into lockers, and like that's just what they do. But I don't think they should pretend it's some high political. But I would say that because I'm a nerd. They might be right. I don't know. Anyway, but I try not to waste a lot of time doing that now, but I am pretty bad at managing my time. I do work a lot, and I'm trying to moderate that a bit more. Unspeakable Things is now not my latest book. It's not even my second to latest book. I've written 2 books since Unspeakable Things.
My fault.
No, it's all right. That stuff takes updating. It's the important one lately to me, because the other 2, I do think my fiction is important, but I think right now, I think fiction is important in general. I'm just not sure mine is the most important, because it's kind of Marxist science fiction, which, I don't know, if people want to spend time reading fiction, I'm fine for them to read Harry Potter right now. But, yeah, I work a lot, and I was trying to moderate that. Up until 2 weeks ago, my plan was to take the next 6 months off and write a nice novel and a few essays. That was my plan, because I'm 30 now, which is super old. It's not super old. And but I was just like, I've worked very hard for a number of years and been traveling a lot. I should, take some time and settle down and play with the dog and, maybe go out once, maybe have a holiday, which, I said, I travel all the time. It's like, no, you travel for work. A holiday is where you don't do anything. It's like, I don't understand this word that you mean. And then Donald Trump got elected and Brexit happened, and that kind of messed up all of my plans. And so I'm really struggling at the moment to work out how to maintain a healthy work balance in the next few years. And I really know that, complaining about Donald Trump fucking up your personal life plan is not, the worst thing Donald Trump has done. But it does make it a bit more personal for me. It's like, all right, now it's personal. I was going to have a holiday, god damn it. And now I have to go and do journalism and, talk with horrible people on the alt-right. And I don't want to. I just want to write nice stories now. And I don't get to for a while. But occasionally I do try and take a day off. And my mum has a dog which she lets me cuddle. It's a really nice dog. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna spoiler you the end of Unspeakable Things, which is not the latest book Laurie has written. It closes with an invitation. It closes with the begin. So what can we do to begin tonight?
Yeah, it's, right, so, in writing this book, and again, I wrote it a couple of years ago, I was talking in some ways more about personal resistance and changing your own life, and in broader terms about building community. I lived with hippies at the time. It was, I still love those hippies. But look, right now there is a really urgent situation going on, and there are actually a lot of practical things that can be done, and there are lots of really good posts about strategy up right now, which are really, really helpful online. But I think basically it is about all of us, particularly those of us in positions of privilege, and whatever that relative privilege is, to work out what resources we have and what resources we can share, because practically building community, not in an idealistic sense, and practically building bridges and support and solidarity is going to be really, really important. And this is not a time when anybody gets to be complacent. I've been madly retweeting articles about strategy for the last 2 weeks now, so if anybody would you can just scroll through my Twitter if you want, but if you Google, literally, now is probably the best time to go online and Google, what do I do now? Because there are a lot of people who've just written the handbook on what you can do now. And a lot of it is based on the United States, but a lot of it is applicable elsewhere. For example, there are a lot of resources about, how you can, if you have a full-time, well-paying job, where do you donate your money? Or is it best to donate your money? One of my nerdy policy academic friends who, we need academics too, has done a really interesting study and a good article which she summarized about the successes of the Black Panther movement and how that mixture of ideology and practical strategy, like it wasn't just about producing pamphlets, they also set up breakfast clubs, they also were active in the community in that way. And she says things like, if you're in a position, if people are coming for state services and you happen to work for those state services, let's say you're a doctor, you work in the tax office, you have a job that's in any way government related, she's like, it's important to stay there and fight to make sure that people don't have those services taken away. It's just little things like that. But I'm just a person who reads a lot of articles on the internet. There are a lot of experts out there who are actually writing the guides, so they can probably answer this better than me.
Okay,
Thanks.
that was my last question. So I would like to open the discussion to the audience. So, who wants to start?
Go on.
Sorry, microphone, thank you.
We have a microphone for you.
Oh, that's cool.
Thank you.
Hi, so thank you very much for coming here, really. We also have an election coming up on the 4th of December, which is also pretty much, we're not really looking forward to it. Mm-hmm. And we're really afraid. And I think, there's people who still haven't decided yet, and I think they can be talked to. Yep. But sometimes I've been wondering, what can you do? How can you talk to people where you feel you definitely can't change their point of view anymore? Because really sometimes it's like we have a pretty much alt-right candidate against the Green Party candidate, and sometimes they'll it's fun, and it's been in the which round are we in? We lost count because we had to do the third. Yeah,
I knew that you had an alt-right guy. I didn't know he was against the Greens.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ.
I mean former Green. He's now
right.
As an independent candidate. But people are like you would come there to the argument really like. You would know what to say and how to counter certain arguments, but then they'd be like, but he's a Green Party candidate. That's it. It's over. The discussion is over. What do you do about that?
All right, that's a really... Look, I'm now just
Sorry,
kind of...
that's a hard one.
No, it is hard, but I'm also kind of thinking back through the stuff I've digested in the past few days and where people are saying they went wrong. And I've found that it's really quite hard to change people's minds on things that they strongly, strongly believe at the best of times. It's even harder when people are angry. And it's really, really hard when you've got, 2 weeks to do it in. But one of the things that people are saying they regret is not talking to their families and not talking to their close friends and people who there is already that bridge with, and explaining the consequences and asking them to, look at what's happened around the world and sitting them down and trying to talk them through it. I know that people have had success, sadly not enough success to change the electoral college results, but with sitting down with their grandma, and it's often not universally, but it is also about like talking to your mum or your granny or granddad and sitting down and saying, look, these are the actual issues here, particularly if they've been absorbing other stuff from the media. Like, this will be the time to take that time and have the chat with grandma, basically, because I think that kind of thing is more useful than the Facebook fight right now, unless it's a Facebook fight with grandma. Or like, some people's nans are on Facebook.
Yeah, also really discussions happened inside of families and really tore certain family members apart. Like it's really, like for me personally, for example, my dad can't be convinced to vote for the former Green Party candidate. It just, and I had to stop, otherwise I really think it would have gone, I would have gone mad.
Can he be convinced not to vote?
Yeah, maybe that would be good. Yeah.
That's probably advocating fraud. I don't think that's advocating electoral fraud, but there are some really good arguments against voting. I believe they're wrong at this time if you're on the left, but you can always look them up and have a go. It's like, oh, well, voting is just a scam anyway, you don't need to do it. That's how you really stick it to the man, Dad.
So starting with people you know might be...
Yeah, lie to your parents, basically.
Thanks.
Sorry. It's probably bad advice. Don't ask me, please.
Another question?
Thank you again for the interesting discussion. I'm planning on having children in the future, and I'm sometimes concerned with the world I'll put them into. If it will be a boy or a girl, both. I see it with the men of my family. They have a very, very toxic picture of what a man has to be. And with the girls, of course, I just have in my family a lot of women who have this ideal of being the victim of because I'm also from a very Catholic background, and it's good, it's very Catholic, and it's very good for your soul to be the victim, to endure. And basically my question is, what would be good strategies to provide for such a future, for dealing with that, for telling my children, hey, it's not like this, you don't have to be like this.
All right. Well, firstly, thank you. I'm also really flattered that people are asking me such massive questions, like I'm someone who might know the answer to, like, how do you raise your kids? Like, I don't know. I don't even have a dog because I'm not allowed one. Like, I would forget to feed it. Like, I don't know. So massive, but also that's a giant, awesome project, and I don't minimize it. But yeah, so I'm sorry if these. So please take this with a pinch of salt. All right, I'm just somebody who writes on the internet and doesn't get out much. But there's a really interesting book that was written in 1986, I believe, in Germany, and I don't actually know the actual German title, but the translation is I think Who's a Good Girl, and it's a story back in the 80s there was this real movement to raise feminist children. And because nobody had really tried to do this before in a serious way, it's a story of one academic feminist trying and kind of failing to raise her daughter in the way that's that's feminist and with self-esteem and tracking the ways in which despite her best efforts and all the reading she's done and all the efforts she's put into it, she doesn't manage it because there's all this stuff in culture and actually I read a recent interview where they came back to that mother and daughter, and the daughter is now I think 32 and she's a lawyer and she's very she's doing great. The daughter is fine. The mum was very, very worried, but the daughter's fine and is a feminist and is great. But it's and talking about what did and didn't work. But again, what I would say, and my family is also kind of Catholic, is that kind of Catholic, also kind of Jewish. It's interesting household dynamic. Is it's not only up to mothers to make a better world. Mothering is a massive, massive job that people should be paid for, and there should be better welfare support for, and universal childcare and universal basic income. Side note. But there is this tendency, and it's a deeply misogynist tendency in society, to blame mothers for not raising the kids right. I don't think it's mums that are to blame for what's happening to young men right now. I think mums are honestly trying their best and have tried their best, and it would make me it makes me sad when I see, like my friends who have kids, like already starting to blame themselves for like their 5-year-old wanting to dress up like a princess, or like stuff that their son is repeating from school. Because like it's not, why are dads never to blame for this? I don't know. It's always mum's fault. And I think all you can do is like, I mean, honestly, like having babysat, I'm impressed if anyone can like keep the kid alive. Like, like I think that's really, really great. Like that would be a great effort. Sorry, I mean, like babies are amazing, but I don't know if I could cope with one myself. So I hope that was all right.
I know it's been a long way up. Thank you.
Hi. I can only see your haircut, and it's great. Like the light is coming down on your haircut, so you look like a floating
Oh my God, I will tell
head.
that to my non-existent children that you just praised my haircut. Thank you. I can die in peace now. My question concerns semantics. Mm-hmm. I've often encountered, like in discussions about using the gender gap or gender star in written or spoken speech, I've often encountered women who say, well, I don't need that because if the masculine pronoun is used, I'm usually fine. And that argument usually does it. And that's like, how would you dismantle such an argument? How would you...
So women saying that, like, well, I don't mind if you say, like, mankind. I know we're talking in different languages here.
Yeah, I know. It's probably, it's more more pressing issue in German.
With gendered pronouns and saying like, oh, that's fine. Look, I hate that. Like, my friend is a woman and she says that's fine. Is still a thing. Like, how is that still a thing?
It's a straw woman.
Yeah, exactly. But it's even bigger than that because it's like, you know, there seems to be this belief in culture that like women have this in the book I use the phrase hive vagina. Like, rather than hive mind, like we're all kind of magically connected, and if one woman thinks something, that's your answer. You're good. You don't have to ask anyone else. Like, it's like that, you know, one woman says it's okay is fine, but like, I mean, maybe you can speak more to this because you're a philology student, so do you want to go ahead?
Okay, I study German philology, Germanistic. So if people say this to me, and they do on a regular basis, I always tell them that if we can make language equal, we cannot make reality equal, because we structure reality with language. So if they think it's okay to maintain an unfair language and still claim that we are equal anyway, it's not true. It's not true on even the simplest basis, and that is language.
Yeah.
So that's what I tell them.
Power is encoded in grammar, not even in words. It's like in English, like there's been huge fights over the pronoun they, because it upsets people, because it's also a plural pronoun. It's so and like people have been using that pronoun for centuries in that way, in a small way. But the idea that, well, firstly, you also say, like, and I'm sure you've used this argument yourself, it's like language changes. Language is not static. Language has changed so much and so unrecognizable. German and English used to basically be the same language. And now I can only barely ask for directions and coffee. Like, you know, language changes all the time, and trying to make it freeze is really regressive, because that's also a way of making power systems freeze. But again, you're the expert here. So
No. You are.
We work with words in different ways, I think.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's good.
Teamwork.
I'm a writer. I made up a phrase. Cookies for me. Anyone else? Sorry.
So I just decided to ask a question too, because it's easier for...
Oh, right, sure.
As I would like to go back to the start when you were talking about masculinity and the kind of discussion which is in feminism, if men can be feminists, and would you say when a man says he is a feminist, can he say that? I know it's a big issue in feminism, but I would like to hear your specified opinion, because that's just my personal view of it. But I think feminism can cause another picture of masculinity when men really can take profit of it. So what's your view on this?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there is this, I don't know if this is precisely what you're getting at, but like there are people, particularly within communities like the left, who will say, oh, well, I can't be sexist, I'm a feminist. Like that does happen sometimes. Now, I would still say that's in some weird way progress, but you know, that tendency does exist, and there are people, particularly like some men, who kind of don't really get what feminism is yet, although kind of they know it's good and they should do it, thinking that being feminist or feminist identified means that you can't be sexist, which is just not true. I mean, like, I have internalized misogyny, we are all sexist in some way. But whether or not men can say they're feminists, like, I'm not the arbiter of who gets to be a feminist, although that would be a really interesting job to have. Like, it would probably come with a giant chair, like, and a little crown. It's like, you may be a feminist now. But, like, I've always thought, like seriously, I've always thought that, like, feminism it's an identity, yeah, but it's mostly a process. Like, most of the time I don't really care what people call themselves, as long as it depends on what they're doing. However, recently it has become more of a political thing to say I'm not a feminist. And that does sometimes worry me, because saying, oh, I'm not a feminist often means like I'm anti-feminist. And, you know, Andrea Dworkin, who said some very crazy things, but was also right about a lot of things, says that, you know, anti-feminism is, you know, one of the purest forms of sexism that there is, because it's attacking any idea that women, you know, deserve liberation. Like, I'm much more concerned about people, you know, both men and women, who come out and say, I'm not feminist. And sorry, this is a complex and changing question, but men identifying as feminists right now is kind of thankless, because a lot of, you know, being real, a lot of people within feminism will be like, oh, you're not really one, or then yell at you. And, like, you know, with great love to my feminist friends and my community, that does happen, and I do understand, and I'm really sorry. And, like, you know, you don't often get cookies for identifying as a feminist. You just be like, well, great, sure, like, now let's get on with stuff. But I think it's a brave thing to do, particularly at a time when people who identify as feminists are increasingly under threat. I think saying you're a feminist, or that you desire to be feminist, is a sign of solidarity that people should take up if they feel they can. And not just say they are, but then, you know, work to be one and to learn more. I think that's more important than ever right now. It's you know, because feminists are really, really under attack, particularly individual feminists. And it's, for a woman to say that she's a feminist, there are lots and lots of places where that's an invitation to harassment and attack. And men saying that too can actually can actually in some way, like, I don't want to say protect, because that's got like nasty, oldie, chivalrous overtones, but it can, like, in the way that, like, you know, it's good ally work, let's say that.
Actually, yeah, what you just said is related to what I wanted to say, because I really struggle with this saying, I'm a feminist sometimes, and then what happens is, for example, friends of mine, and often also women or girls, are like, maybe they don't react, or they don't like the word feminist. When you say the word, they are like, okay, no, you know, don't talk about that. And somehow I find this really upsetting, and often I don't know how to react. And I mean, 1 or 2 years ago, there was this thing going on the internet, why we still need feminism.
Yeah.
With this hashtag, we still need feminism, because And I mean, there are thousands of reasons. And even when I say things and give examples why we need it, people are like, yeah, but I don't know. They don't want to use this word and they just want to be away from it somehow. And what do you say to this, or
Like,
how should we react?
I'm really sorry, firstly, that you had that with your mates, because it's painful, that kind of thing. But I think, look, feminism is a threatening word. It shouldn't have to be, but it is a scary word, and it's a word that implies that you have politics that might, or ideas that might not make you an easy person to be around all the time for a certain kind of guy. And that's okay. But, like, one of the reasons a lot of women and girls are frightened to identify as feminist, even if they agree with everything that, like, feminists say, one of the reasons they're frightened of the word is because, you know, we're conditioned from birth to make men feel comfortable and to identify, you know, to associate being a woman and being a good person with not being confrontational and not being angry and not being all these things that even saying you're a feminist is supposed to mean. And that's one of the reasons why people are frightened of the word, even when they're not necessarily frightened of some of the ideas. And, like, to your question earlier, that's one of the reasons I think the word still has power. I mean, yes, it's about, feminism is what you do rather than who you are, but it is, you know, it's a word that makes people uncomfortable, which is one of the reasons I think we should still use it. Like, there's all these debates. Fortunately, they've dropped off recently, but, like, do we need to rebrand feminism? Do you remember those? Like, it was a really embarrassing thing in Britain about 5 years ago, where, like, feminists wanted to rebrand feminism. It was like sexy womanism or like equalism. And it's like, well, you know, we'd listen to you if only you were just a bit nicer. If you were just, like, nice and pretty and maybe just spoke a bit less and made things comfortable for us. And ultimately, like, you can only get so far with feminism that way, because feminism is actually about changing the status quo, and it is threatening. It should be threatening. But yeah, so yeah, that's my answer. Sorry, I didn't have an end to that thought. Apologize. Who was first?
Hey. It was really nice what you just read from your book. I've read some parts from your book, but not all, because I stole it from my teenage sister, and now she stole it back.
Amazing.
So I cannot finish it. But I read that a part about masculinity and toxic masculinity that you just read too. But I think I only got to it like through half of it. So my question is, because I know that there are these...
What's the rest of the book about?
Yeah.
What's in the rest?
No.
I can just read it to you.
Read now, please, start. No, it's actually... I know this concept about masculinity, like, and it's really complex, like marginalized masculinity is a part of it. And that's something I find very difficult to talk about, because I'm from Cologne, where this New Year's Eve mob, I don't know, incidents, brutal situations happened. And after that, a lot of people came to me, and they often start to, you know, just do their racist shit. And they use this as an argument, like as if they were feminists now, all of a sudden.
They mask it as feminist.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but there's different parts of masculinity, but I think it's a very academic and complex topic. So I often find it difficult to talk about it with people who have no idea about it and to explain it. So is there any simple way?
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? And then you're trapped there.
Intersectional feminism, like, okay, the thing you're talking about with, like, racists and far-right people suddenly like deciding they're feminists now. That's really important, and we should have talked about that earlier because it's really, really important right now. Xenophobia is not feminism, and you can't just say, oh, suddenly we care about, women's rights because we hate Muslims. Like that's not feminism. That's imperialism. And feminist ideas have always been co-opted in the service of imperialism. I've actually got another book coming out pretty soon where I talk about this a lot more, because obviously this has been happening more lately. But basically the argument is sort of like, well, we can't let these immigrants rape and harass women. That's our job. It's fine when we do it. It's literally like it's this hugely parochial, and you see it as well in racism rather than xenophobia. This fear of the immigrant or black masculinity, as and being told that that's protecting white, and it's always concern for white women as well, not all women. It's this rhetoric of like protecting white womanhood from the kind of mysterious other. It's dangerous for so many reasons. Firstly, because it's saying that, well, some women are worth protecting and some women are not. I mean, the amount of Muslim and black and brown women who are being harassed even just this week and attacked by these same people who claim to love women is astonishing and massive hypocrisy. But also it allows white men to place responsibility for sexism somewhere outside themselves and say, well, we're not bad. These guys over here, these are the real sexists. What we do is fine. And, the amount of times over the past 5 years, I've been every day, people say to me, oh, well, if you think this is bad, you should move to Saudi Arabia. If this is, and these people have, I've noticed that, and this may be just my interpretation, but I don't think it is. These people seem to have this weird kind of erotic fascination with othered violence against women. Like people, I get routine every day. I get threatened with, Islamic violence against women. Like I get people saying I should be stoned to death and sold to ISIS and raped. And I mean, this is just daily life on Twitter for me. But it's always white men who say this to me. They seem to be for people who claim to hate Islamic violence, they spend a lot of time thinking about it. Some of them draw pictures. Some of them paste my head on pictures. They've really thought about this. It seems to fascinate them. But, they can say, oh, it's these guys who do it and want it to happen, not us. Sorry, that's I didn't mean to be triggery, but it just happens. Anyway, thank you for your question.
Hi. Perhaps I jump a little bit back in the topic, but I got stuck with a thought. I think especially now that we have a lot of angry white men getting more power, or we have a long history of angry white men ruling countries, I think it's even more important to have men declaring themselves as feminists. And the question for me is, I think it's hard for women to declare themselves as feminists because perhaps they get, assaulted. But I think it's also very difficult for men to declare themselves as feminists. Perhaps you can just make a statement how you see this. Or how do you think how hard it is for men to declare themselves as feminists?
I mean, thank you. It's an important question. Look, I've never been a man declaring myself as feminist, so I can't speak to how that is. I know that there's one interesting thing that does go on is that there is a lot of kind of ritualized shaming of men, particularly within these new online and alt-right communities, not just who declare themselves feminists, but who aren't anti-feminist, who are like, you know, you really shouldn't say that about rape. That's a bit much, man. Like people, there's this word cuck that people use. Have you come across it? And there's a lot of, you know, shaming of people of men who declare an allegiance, because, you know, however you do it, whether or not it's, you know, saying you're a feminist or taking a stand against something, the idea is that basically you've betrayed your own side, and that idea is becoming more and more prevalent. And there's this word cuck, which is from the kind of old British word cuckold, which literally means a man who allows his wife to sleep with other people. It's like you've allowed your women to be used, and it's really weird term. But yeah, it's not cost-free. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, look, misogyny is not just about men. It's not something that men do to women. It's also something that men do to women for other men. Like misogyny and homophobia are ways that men perform masculinity and prove their masculinity, and, you know, and protect themselves against violence, because, you know, male violence is also enacted, and it's also a threat for men. Gender policing is something that happens to men too, and misogyny is involved in all of it. Homophobia is involved in all of it, and to take a stand against that, it is a risk. It is far and away less of a risk than a woman or somebody who is queer taking the same stand. You know, the risk is not. Sometimes the risk is violence, but it's much less likely to be violence, and that's why, you know, being an ally, I think being an ally is more powerful than ever now. And whilst, like, I understand that people are like, oh, well, you're just saying that because you want cookies and you want people to think you're a good person, I think it is actually a risk. It's, you know, in the same way that it's more important than ever right now for people to declare allegiance and solidarity with people of other faiths and other backgrounds, and to, you know, to make it clear that you don't have to just be on one side based on who you are and how you were born. There's this other thing that it's not just the alt-right that men have started saying, which is that, like, feminist men, like, say they're feminists to get laid. Like, is this a thing that gets said here? Like, oh, you're only saying you're a feminist because you want some sweet, sweet feminist action. Like, I don't know, is that like... Sometimes. Yes, sometimes, but also, like, I mean, it's not... People do all kinds of stuff that later works out really well because they want to get laid. Like, I'm not totally against that as a reason, even if it were true. Like, look, personally, I don't sleep with people who aren't feminists, so that it totally works on me. Like, at least it's a filtering system. But also these people seem to be angry at the idea that maybe you can't get laid as easily if you're an asshole. Like, that idea seems to make you angry, like they've noticed, and in some way they're trying to work the concept round in your face that men who hate women don't necessarily always want to sleep with men who really hate women. Like, they can't work out why this might be the case, and they're like, oh, you know, it's all... It's hilarious, really, because they're trying to work everything in this cult-like way into, you know, well, this must be an alternative mating strategy that these men have worked out rather than actual politics. So, anyway, any more questions? Maybe we have time for like one or two more.
I think so.
Hi.
Hi.
I recently read an article you wrote called "Fear of a Feminist Future."
Oh, I'm glad someone read that. Thanks.
and the books are all parked on my Kindle already that you recommended.
Thanks.
But there's one thought in there that I hope I got right. You talk about utopias, a different society.
Mm-hmm.
and that men can't think up a society where everybody's equal, basically, where nothing is taken away from men. Did I get that half right, at least?
Well, I am actually going to say, like, not all men. It's not impossible. It's just harder. Like, yeah, you did get it right.
Okay, because when I read that, I thought of how I was raised and what I was taught, and this whole thing was called "Women Are Equal" when I grew up. So, and the way I was taught all of these things was by telling me what I can't be, what I can't do. It was all of "don't do this," and then you'll be okay. So I was taught what not to do.
Like, what kind of thing not to do? Like,
how not to treat women, how not to be as a man, how not to be as a boy, how not to speak, how not to think.
yeah.
And that's what I thought about when I read that men can't think of a society where there's liberation, but nothing is taken away from them. And that thought is at that end in my head. So,
Thank you. Well, that's a really good point, and I think we are in this. So masculinity is in this weird place, and the way we talk about masculinity is in this weird place right now. And you're right in that there is like the idea of fear of a feminist future is there is a lot of anxiety around allowing people to think of positive futures beyond this weird gender war. So we've got to the stage, you're right, of telling men, don't do this, don't do that. But the idea of what you might do instead is actually is more threatening, I think, to patriarchy. It's more threatening to think, oh, well, maybe instead you might treat women in this way. You might express yourself in this way. I think it's a more profound threat to patriarchal power in some ways, and that's why there's this mental block. There's this imaginative block, and that's what. Sorry, this is really interesting, and I'm making some of this up on the fly, but that's what's kind of. It's one of the reasons that I think a lot of men do find this stuff really hard, because it's like, okay, well, I know what I'm meant to not do. But what do I do now? And on a broader social level, there is this, with the idea of the crisis in masculinity, it's the idea that the old model of male dominance is over. Most of us are kind of glad that it's over, but we're lacking new models of masculinity. And there are actually more and more, not sufficient, but there are more new models of different ways to be female and different stories about what kind of woman you can be. But there are fewer stories about how you can be different as a guy. I refer to this as, I didn't actually come up with this myself, but it's a friend of mine did. A lot of my ideas come from like my cleverer friends when they're drunk, and then I don't drink, so I write down all their ideas. That's the secret. But I do try to credit, and so it's the James Bond problem, right? And obviously, like in Britain, we're uniquely obsessed with James Bond because, like, woo, the Empire. But so James Bond is like. They're still making these movies, and people are still going to see these movies, and there is still this idea that James Bond is a hero, and he's what all the little boys want to be. But we also kind of know that James Bond is like, he's a psychopath. He's a rapist. The government pays him to kill people. He can kill whoever he wants. Like, every woman he sleeps with ends up dead. He's a violence, like James Bond is the guy who, like, if you found out your friend was dating him, you'd be like, Jesus Christ, you wouldn't invite that guy to your party because he's an asshole. And everyone knows that. But at the same time, there's no, men are still told that they should be James Bond, and that there's no other kind of, and that's the kind of pinnacle of masculine heroism. And there's not, like, different ways to be heroes are actually weirdly lacking, despite the fact that most of the heroes in our cultural storytelling are male. Anyway, that's the James Bond problem. I actually can't even remember which one of my friends said it first, but I know it wasn't me. I just stole it. So you can pretend it's yours if you like.
And may I just add, I see a connection between, to put it bluntly, if you have my mothers, the mothers that raised us, told us what not to do, are now grown men in governments saying they've told us long enough what we can't do, we'll show them what we can do.
It is kind of...
So that's where the anger comes from, I guess.
I think it would not be too much of a reach to suggest that many of the people taking power right now have issues with their mothers. I don't think that would be too much of a stretch at all. Like fuck you don't tell me what I can't do to women, Mom. I'm going to destroy America. Now see what, yeah. Anyway, thank you. Maybe one more? Oh, we've got a couple. This person has it.
Thank you. I liked your point about making the left and maybe also feminism more entertaining. Mm. But what are your thoughts about how could we do that, given that the privilege of the left is the fact that it can see that the problems are a bit more complex than the right presents them to be. So this black and white does not really exist. So how can we do that?
50 Shades of Grey. Like, that's a very different book. Sorry. You're right. And look, I maybe put too much emphasis on it because it's literally my job to make like complex lefty ideas comprehensible and entertaining. Like, I find it easier to do that because that's what I get paid to do, and I don't have to do anything else in my work. Like other people who have real jobs may not want to do that at the end of a long, hard day's work. But I think we do kind of have to get better at it, and it's a shame because it is harder for people on the left, and we also, being entertaining often involves simplifying things, and when you try to simplify things on the left, that you can't do that without a giant argument every single time, and it involves a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion, and that's just something that I guess we have to do. But I also think, I'm not trying to make the argument that, at all, that particularly feminists should be sexy, and I know you didn't say this, but appealing and and entertaining to get people to listen to us. I don't think it's mandatory at all to make to be kind of charming and charismatic to get people to listen to you. No, people should listen anyway. It's the job of certain of people within the media and various forms of writing and talking about it. But part of the reason I do what I do is that my friends who have real jobs can just retweet something. I don't have to explain it in the same way. It's not everyone's job everyone has different strengths, and I maybe over-egg that because this one happens to be mine. I'm really, really bad at organizing volunteer work, and I'm really bad at doing community kind of work I'm bad at the washing up. Okay, I was gonna say it. That's why I don't live in my commune of hippies anymore. Because I, like all writers, I secretly think that writing is the most important thing anyone can do ever, and that writers are kind of more special than anyone else. And that's just not true.
I understand that, but what I'm saying, perhaps there are other ways, because look at the statistics. Who voted for? What kind of women voted for Trump? Mm-hmm. Mainly women without a college degree. It's the same here in Austria. Right. The right-wing candidate and the left-wing candidate. They didn't tell you before, but the Green candidate is an academic. He's an economics professor. So that's exactly the problem, that you cannot reach the people that don't understand what he means, although he might have the policies that would benefit them.
Yeah. So there is, and this is how we get to the point where like feminism and anti-racism are literally confused with elitism, which they're not. They're the opposite of elitism. And but yeah, it's really, really important to get those ideas across, and there's often not the space for it. I don't know if anybody here works in the media or in any kind of job like that, but unfortunately there's not, like, feminism isn't considered entertaining even when it is and should be, and these ideas are kind of, they've got this reputation for being po-faced, so that may be and boring, which may be one of the reasons they're not covered as much by the press. But I don't think it's just on us to be more entertaining and better at showmanship. It is really, really hard to tell a complex story in an interesting way rather than just be like, it's the immigrants, that's easy. Like, no, like immigration is part of a global system of, let's talk about finance capitalism and how, the movement of people versus the movement of, like, you've lost everyone by that stage. Even though that's such, so you have to find ways of, like, I don't know, shadow puppets or something. It's, yeah. Sorry, shadow puppets is not a particularly rousing note to end on. Maybe we have one more.
I saw 2 more questions. Is that fine with you?
Yeah, sure. Okay. If everybody, I don't mind if people need to go, by the way. I'm not going to be like...
Maybe on a more general note, there were people claiming a fourth wave of feminism related to social media and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a bit hard. There's a lot of alliances on the internet, and it's easy, as you said, to retweet stuff and to like stuff on Facebook. But sometimes this doesn't really translate to reality somehow. And I've been wondering, all of this is really, I think, very important, but it's easy also to forget again that you liked something and then, like, what do you think about the relationship between online activism, or as sometimes they call it, demeaningly hashtag activism and stuff, and then, how this translates to reality somehow?
Well, look, I think a lot of people want to do down the internet, and like, for a lot of people, there's the distinction between online activism and offline. Like, there's the theorist Nathan Jurgensen coined the term like digital dualism. It's this fallacy where the internet is one thing and then there's the real world. Like, it doesn't work like that anymore. Pretty soon after the internet began to be more democratic, it's not been that way. The internet is real life for a lot of people. It's where we meet friends. It's where we do a lot of our work. Not for everyone, but look, a lot of this stuff is about changing culture. And if you want to change, rather than just changing laws, and if you want to change culture, you go to where culture is being created. And at the moment, culture is being created largely online, but not just online, which is why TV still matters, movies still matter, television news still matters, newspapers matters, the conversations you're having with your family still matter. But I think like the idea that the internet doesn't matter is just, for some people it's just a way of saying, like, they don't understand young people, basically, and like a way of reassuring themselves that all this new activism doesn't really matter, when actually it's, just the rise of the alt-right and the reaction against online feminism is violent and loud enough that I don't think we should be worrying about that anymore, basically. Although I would say, like, liking something rather than retweeting it, I always thought that's a bit cowardly. Because, like, you want to like something, but you don't want anybody to see that you liked it. So I'm always like, I'll like retweet or go home is kind of my thing. That's just me.
Very last question. Anybody?
We could go home.
We
don't have to retweet.
Party. Remember we go party?
Yes. You have to talk about the bands.
I will talk about the band. Okay. So there are 3 bands playing at 10 p.m. downstairs. It's admission free. Yay. Food Canister, Running Feet, and The Hyenas. That's pretty cool. You should go. We will.
Running Feet. Running Fetus.
Oh, fetus. I did tell you wrong. It's running fetus. Okay.
That's a really bold name. What is it running from?
Patriarchy.
Okay, great.
Okay, so they will be playing downstairs. And thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming and for asking such amazing questions and for having me. It's been lovely. Thanks.
Thank you.